The Archangel Chronicles by Raymond Collodi. Copyright 2023, all rights reserved. Chapter 22, The Three Manly Sports.
You say you're fine, but I can see right through. You're holding your secrets for way too long. This can't keep going on. With every lie, they keep on hurting you, getting away with everything they do. This can't keep going on. No, we're gonna find them, and I'm gonna fight for you. They better start hiding. We'll be running with the lions, lions. We'll be running with the lions, lions. They can't run, they can't hide. We won't stop until they're down. We'll be running with the lions, lions.
Adam. A year had passed since I said goodbye to Abu. I missed him terribly. I missed his bright, cheerful smile, those childish antics with Calliope and Atlas, and the joyous mischief they made together. Now all of this had passed into memory. I was very lonely. I missed being his mentor, guardian, and quasi-father figure. Every man needs someone to learn his knowledge and wisdom. It is the natural order of things. It is part of the meaning of one's life to have someone who looks up to you and studies all you say, watches all you do, and is absorbed your wisdom like a sponge. I had heard rumors that he had gone far away with his new lore master, Aduthuma, into the sacred mountains to learn his new vocation. I feared that I would never see him again. I feared the loss of his passing into another phase of life, so I kept myself busy. There was much to do in this movable city of nomads, a city of felt and wood that could be taken apart and moved to any other spot on the endless steppes. For now, though, the Vasilisa was content to see her people enjoy the abundance of local harvests, the teeming schools of fish taken from fresh waters, the sweet grasses and vast pastures of the lowlands to feed the ever-present livestock, and the Massagetae's beloved horses. I resumed my ministrations of basic medicines, salves, and the setting of broken limbs. My skills were much in demand in a society of fearless riders, where broken arms and legs were not uncommon. Then there was the Vasilisa to keep at bay. She was a challenge. She was intent on her unilaterally imposed engagement with me, on setting a date for a grand wedding feast. I continually demurred. So far, I was able to fend her off with many excuses. I pretended to consult the hidden powers of the universe in my new role as shaman. Those powers, I told Axia, decreed that the time was not yet ripe for marriage. I was in a delicate dilemma with Axia. She was volatile. I reasoned that my only way out of this was to find a substitute, a replacement groom in my stead. So I shamelessly resumed my role as the matchmaker. I was determined to bring Arsalion firmly back onto Axia's radar screen. One day, as I sat with Scarus in Theron's sumptuous tent, I brought this subject to their attention. Theron sat back amidst the cushions and pillows of his divan. The remains of a prodigious feast of fish and fowl lay on silver platters in front of him. He licked his gold-ringed fingers one by one, savoring the last of the meal. He wiped his mouth on his sleeve and reached over to grasp a golden goblet brimming with dark wine. Bringing the vessel to his lips, he paused for a moment to belch loudly. He downed several long draughts of his Greek wine, set the goblet down on the table, and sent pensively for a few minutes before speaking. "By Bacchus, Adam the Wise," he said between several more belches. "I think you're onto something." He sat upright, his eyes brightening in excitement. The ideas began churning in his mind. "Yes, yes!" He jumped to his feet and began pacing about the room, arms flying and hands shaping his exclamations. "We must have a royal tournament. We need to persuade the Vasilisa to call one before the great hunt. The winner will accompany the queen in opening the Nurge in a place of honor and shoot the first arrow to open the hunt. That would certainly get her attention. Yes, yes." "Theron, my friend, I knew I could count on you. You're always the showman, the impresario. But tell me, how can we make this happen? How can we make sure that Arsalion is the winner of the tournament and rides with the queen at the place of honor?" "We will conjure up some magic, my friend. We must take others into our little conspiracy. We will talk to Scumaxa and Protothesis and reveal our plans. They can put the idea to her. But you are right, Adam the Wise. This is not the hard part. The hard part is that Arsalion must be the winner of all the contests. He must master the three manly sports, wrestling, archery, and horse racing. He must be the champion in all three to accompany the queen." "Seems to me, my great friend," interrupted Scarus, "that there be no doubt that Arsalion is as fine a horseman as any in this host. That Sarmatian has the finest horses that can be found in this here camp." "Okay, so that leaves wrestling and archery," I said. "What does he need to win those contests?" Theron stroked his thick black beard, pursed his lips, and furrowed his brow as he thought. "I know this horse archer. His name is Arash. He was hired to protect my caravans. I will send for him. Neither Apollo himself nor Artemis could match his powers with a bow and arrow. He will come. I will make it worth his while." "That leaves wrestling," I said. "What do we need to do to ensure that Arsalion is victorious? What are the rules? Who is he likely to face?" "Rules," laughed Theron. "Adam, surely you know the answer to that question yourself. You have been present in the Scythian camp long enough to know. There are no rules, save these two. You must not bite your opponent nor gouge his eyes. The object is to topple your opponent to the ground and have them yield. There are no other rules. He could do anything he pleases. He can strike with the hand, the legs, the head, the elbows, the feet. He can grasp and twist and lock limbs. Anything is possible." "By my judgment," I said, "Arsalion appears to be supple and lithe and quick in his movements, but he's not the largest of men. Does a man's size matter?" "Aye, size counts greatly in Scythian wrestling, me friend," Theron replied. "The queen's invitation will attract many challengers from the host. Most of them will outweigh Arsalion. Once one of these giants gets a hold of someone like him, he'll crush the life out of him." Scarus now stood before us, a big smile on his scarred face. "Pancration," was all he said. Theron's face brightened, and he nodded agreement with Scarus. "Pancration," he shouted gleefully. "Pancration? What is that?" I asked. "Adam the Wise," laughed Theron. "Where in the world do you come from? Who has not heard of Pancration? Really, I'm going to have to stop calling you wise. You should know that it is the greatest, manly, unarmed combat system ever invented. And of course, it was we Greeks who created it." "And it was we Romans who perfected it," interrupted Scarus. He turned to me. "Dominus, Pancration is a martial art. 'Tis often performed these days in the arena. All legionnaires are trained in it." "But what is it?" "'Tis a disciplined method o' hand strikes, feet strikes, arms and leg locks, body blows that can take a man down 3 times your own size. But where do we find someone to teach this martial art to a Sarmatian prince with the short time available to us? Why, Dominus, ye cut me to the quick, moaned Scarus in a mock insulted voice. Right here, me, ye looking at the reigning champion for the 3rd Legion, Cyrenica, and 3-time champion of all the Egyptian legions. I'd be willing to train him if he be willing to put up with the pain. Several days later, I went to find Arsalion in the camp. I found him in his yurt, sitting cross-legged before the fire in the center of the dwelling, smoke curling up through the hole in the canopy above the fire. He was sipping tea mixed with mare's milk. The walls of the cavernous yurt were hung with richly colored silks of all colors and hues. The floors were covered with fine woven rugs, illustrated with fantastic predators leaping upon stylized antelopes in a life-and-death struggle. He looked up at me calmly as I asked permission to enter, removing my shoes. He was genuinely pleased to see me and returned my bow, his handsome, angular face breaking into a broad, white-toothed smile. Adam the Wise, Master Shaman, my tent is yours and my humble meal. I will willingly share with you, my guest. After a cordial meal of roasted goat, cheese, and dark bread, I got to the point. My lord Arsalion, I have come here to plot with you. Plot? Against whom? Before you answer, my lord, know this. I will not act in secret against any person. There are exceptions to every rule, my friend. I have not come here in treachery, but to speak about matters of the heart. When you hear my proposition, I suspect you will see the wisdom of the secrecy. This is not just anyone I'm talking about, my lord, but the Queen herself. Will you hear me and keep my confidence? Ah, the Queen, he nodded, setting down the steaming bowl of tea. He sighed. I am afraid, my lord Shaman, that she has no eyes for me. It is only you that she watches. It is you that she desires. Are you not betrothed to her? In the Queen's mind, we are betrothed, but not my own. I've had little say in the matter, and Arsalion, my friend, I think you are wrong. I have seen how she looks at you with sidelong glances. She is young, she is impulsive, and though she has fixed her attentions on me, I think this is a passing thing. My heart is pledged to another, far, far away. She knows this. I have been taken away from my beloved and brought here, half a world away against my will. I am the Queen's captive, but in my thoughts, I look for the day when I may return to my home in Alexandria. That is why I need you, my friend, to help me. Help? How? By what spell would the Queen's fancy be turned away from the hero who brought her back to life? I can't compete with such a legend. I have an idea, my prince. It will not be easy, but I think there may be a way to put you front and center as her worthy suitor. Well, then tell me, Adam. I am ready to risk all to get her attention. We sat by the fire in Arsalion's tent long into the night, discussing every detail of the emerging plan. The first part of the plan unfolded as it should. Arash the archer was summoned. He arrived at the camp and began his instruction of Arsalion in earnest. Arsalion was a good student. He had trained all his life as a cataphract, a heavily armored spearman on a fully armored horse. He was lean and strong, but was not an archer by training or experience, even though, of course, he had some great familiarity with the bow, as all the steppe peoples do. But a horse archer was an entirely different thing than a lancer. Arash, who was all of 2 inches taller than 5 feet, stood before Arsalion on the plain far outside the camp. He looked at him up and down and walked around him as if he was sizing up a prize horse. He held up his recurved Scythian bow, made from wood, horn, and sinew. It was short as bows go, being about 3 feet long. This made it easy to be handled by a horse archer, riding at full gallop, shooting from multiple positions and angles. The bow could be put back into its leather case when not in use. Arash thrust the bow to Arsalion. "Show me," grunted Arash, pointing to the stuffed antelope target, propped up about 30 meters distant. Arsalion stepped forward to the task. His quiver was fixed to his belt on the left-hand side. He reached in, picked out an arrow, and took a sideways stance towards the target. He drew the bow back swiftly with one arrow notched. He aimed carefully and let the arrow fly. The missile shot through the space to the target and found its mark, hitting the stuffed antelope target on its rear quarter. I was impressed with the elegant grace and skill of the shot. Arsalion was rather pleased with himself. He turned to Arash with a big grin on his handsome face and a twinkle in his eye. "Well, Master Arash, I still think I have my touch." Arash spat on the ground. "Pfft, bad," was all he said. "Too slow. You die, slow like that." Arash picked up another bow. He raised it above his head in a signal. 2 attendants to the rear saw it and brought out another stuffed antelope target, setting it up 30 meters to the rear of where we were standing. Arash stepped up again to Arsalion and pulled an arrow out of his quiver. He handed it to Arsalion. "You take. I go there." He walked to the front target. "Now you shoot round me and hit target." "As you wish, Master Arash," said Arsalion, giving him a mock salute. Arash stood before the target, unperturbed. From where Arsalion stood, the head and front quarter of the target were still visible. The rear quarters were blocked by Arash's body. "Go! You shoot now!" he commanded. Arsalion looked to me and then to Scarus. He shrugged and turned to Arash in the distance. Again, the same slow, smooth notching of the arrow on the left or knuckle side of the bow handle. The same smooth draw of the notched arrow held between his pointer and middle finger, which were hooked around the bowstring. He drew it back, took a breath, and let it fly. The results were not at all what any of us expected. In fact, if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I simply would not have believed it. Just as Arsalion let the arrow fly, Arash, moving faster than I've ever seen a man move before, turned sideways and stepped towards the speeding arrow. In one incredibly swift movement, he reached out, caught the arrow in flight with his right hand, and, jumping high, in one continuous movement, notched the arrow, drew the bowstring, and let it fly back to the astonished Arsalion, standing dumbfounded. The arrow passed just over Arsalion's shoulder and below his ear, whistling into the target behind him, striking it just behind the shoulder. It would have been a kill shot if the antelope had been a live animal. Arsalion turned to me, blanching white in astonishment. But Arash was not finished. Just as his first arrow hit the target, he shot 3 more in the space of no more than 3 seconds as he walked toward the rear target. All of these arrows found their mark, making a tight circle around the first arrow. Arash drew 5 more arrows from his quiver and held him in his right drawing hand. As his signal, an attendant came forward and threw 5 leather balls around the size of a grapefruit into the air. Arash, a blur of movement, going down on one knee, notched, drew, and let 5 arrows in quick succession. Each of them found their mark, as each ball was tossed midair, piercing them clean through. Scarus could not contain himself. "By Mars me Dominus, I never seen such skill. By Jupiter fulminata, if I had a dozen of these lads, no army could stand against us. If we had 10,000 of 'em, we'd conquer the world." Arash reached into his quiver for 5 more arrows and handed them to Arsalion. "Now you shoot. 5 arrows in time it takes to take 3 breaths." "That's not humanly possible," said Arsalion. "Wrong," barked Arash. Arsalion took the 5 arrows into his left hand. He awkwardly tried to grasp the first arrow with his right hand and notch it, but ended up dropping several of the arrows. "Ugh!" he yelled in frustration. Arash stepped forward and slapped Arsalion's bow hand, sending the bow and all of the arrows flying. "Wrong! Wrong! Wrong! You must learn to hold arrows like a Massagetae horse archer. No time to aim. No time to shoot only 1 arrow. Learn or die, Sarmatian," he bellowed. I could see that Arash made his point. This style of archery was dynamic, not static. The niceties of cautious shooting at still targets would count for nothing on a galloping steppe horse. So began a vigorous course of training with Arsalion and his teacher, leaving the camp for days at a time. We promised Arash that there would be no tournament until he was satisfied his student was ready. In between long bouts of mastering the art of the bow, Arsalion also began his lessons in Pancratian with Scarus's none too gentle lessons. I watched them training. I came to learn that Pancratian was a much favored event at the ancient Olympic Games. Athenians in particular excelled at it. The warriors of Philip and Alexander of Macedon's armies were well trained in the art. The Romans adapted it and turned it into a featured contest during gladiatorial games in the arenas of the empire. Drawing on my own memories of the future for context, I would describe it as a mixed martial art. The contestants wore no armor, no padding, and in fact few clothes, except for loincloths and knuckles wrapped with padded leather wrappings. They stood in a ring with a referee bearing a long stick used to punish infractions. Like Scythian wrestling, there were almost no rules. Using a combination of punches, kickboxing, hand strikes with open or closed fists, holds, arm blocks, leg blocks, and takedown throws, opponents battled within a ring drawn on the ground. No biting or gouging, but everything else was fair game. Arsalion and Scarus spent a lot of time discussing strategy, tactics, in particular how to deal with a much larger opponent through feints, speed, and maneuver. But there was one simple tactic which would, as it turned out, stop a giant in his tracks. Finally, the day came when Arash and Scarus were satisfied with their student. Now it was time to exert some persuasion. One evening, after a satisfying feast in the large hall filled with warriors, I stood up. Axia was seated at the high table, attended to by her priestesses. "Vasilisa, will you hear me?" "Speak, Adam the Wise, and we will listen." "My queen, we have been in this camp now for many moons. The snows of winter have given way to the sweet rains of spring, and the long hot days of summer now give way to the shorter, cooler days of the fall. Frost is on the ground in the morning, and soon the first snows of winter will be upon us. Your host has grown numerous. Cattle must be slaughtered, meat must be prepared, and stores of fish and grain must be laid up for the winter. Plans must be made." Axia nodded to me. Her eyes swept the assembly. "Truly, Adam the Wise, we have lingered long in this place. Our scouts have gone far and wide, many leagues beyond the south and east and west. But the grass is sweet, the water is clean and plentiful, and the pastures sustain our herds. Our people have thrived in this place. This is why we wait. Artaxes bides his time. He waits to strike us when we are weak. He knows where we are. One day he will seek us out, and we shall face him. That is why we wait here. Aye, our enemy is nowhere to be seen, but he waits to strike with his allies, the Parthians. He longs to reclaim these lands and our people and destroy the house of Bartatua. She paused, thinking, and then continued. But you give me good counsel. We must prepare for another winter, which is not far off. Scumaxa stood and bowed to the queen. Sister Queen, honored daughter of Bartatua, may I speak? Yes, my brother prince. We all wish to hear from Scumaxa, so speak that all present may hear. Sister Queen, your people are well fed these long months. They are rested. Our host grows. Our horses and cattle and sheep multiply. The gods have smiled upon us in this place. But I fear your people grow fat and lazy and have become too attached to this one place. We are not out of danger. Artaxes and his allies may be beyond our grasp at this time, but they lie in wait and may spring upon us when we are not ready. Axia bowed to her brother. My brother prince, you speak few words, but ever do you say truth. Tell us then what is to be done. Surely you do not counsel moving the host south towards the lands of the Parthian allies of Artaxes. We do not seek bloodshed for its own sake. We do not covet their lands and cities. And should we not confront them on ground of our own choosing, where our people and flocks can be well fed whilst we wait? Protothesis came to the front of the assembly and stood beside his brother. Sister Queen, brother prince, both of you speak truth. He turns towards me and bowed. And you too, Adam the Wise. He took a step forward and turned to all in the assembly. We are people of the steppes. We are not dwellers in stone houses surrounded by stone walls like the southerners. We are not farmers who slave to harvest wheat in plowed fields under the hot sun. We answer to no overlord. We are free. We move where we will, following our herds with the seasons, and none may stop us. This must not change. No, brother, said Scumaxa. No one amongst us would say otherwise, but we must remain sharp, like the point of a lance, and not let our valor be blunted by too much feasting and easy living in warm dwellings. He turned to Axia. Sister Queen, it is now time to sharpen our spears and swords. It is time to practice our prowess with the bow and arrow. Scumaxa paused for dramatic effect. Then, speaking like a prophet, he turned to the assembly and raising his hand shouted, It is time for the Nurge! All assembled at the feast stood, some climbing on tables and benches, all raising their hands and waving them back and forth in unison. They stamped their feet and shouted, Their shouting and stamping went on for quite a while. Finally, Theron seized the opportunity and came before the queen. He held up his arms to silence the crowd, announcing, Friends, allies, allow me to speak. Axia, sitting in her high-backed chair, smiled and gestured to him. Theron Simonides, our friend and benefactor, what say you? My queen, whose wisdom rivals that of Athena herself, here's what I propose. Grant this boon to your people. Declare the day of the great hunt. Your warriors and herdsmen will praise you for it. But I listen to your brother princes. As our sovereign, you must lead the hunt. Tradition holds that you must slay the first game and offer it to the gods. But let this year be different." "How so, my lord Theron? This is our way. The sovereign must claim the first prize of the great hunt." "My Vasilisa, I say that for this nurge, you declare a place of honor for a worthy warrior who will prove himself by winning a tournament of the 3 manly sports. That champion should be at your side when you claim the first game of the hunt for the gods." A commotion arose from the back of the hall. The ranks of the crowd parted, and Arsalion came forward, striding confidently up to Axia, where he knelt on bended knee. "O great queen of the Massagetae, let me give a challenge to all the warriors of your host." "You have leave to speak, my prince and valued ally," said Axia. "Great Vasilisa, warrior daughter of Bartatua, sovereign of the Massagetae, and queen of the steppes, I say this to your people. I challenge any warrior in the 3 manly sports to a contest. I vow that I shall be the winner of the tournament, so that I may have the honor of being at your side." Upon saying this, Arsalion, in one smooth, elegant movement, doffed his cap, sweeping it before him down to the floor, bowing deeply at the waist. This gesture did not go unnoticed. Axia, surprised, glanced at me sideways, and then looked back to the bowing Sarmatian. Her lips parted in a smile, and her eyes sparkled. The crowd began to murmur. There was much nodding of heads and exchanges whispered from ear to ear. Axia gestured to Arsalion, who stood and stepped back into the crowd. The queen stood, tall and formidable. Her priestesses knelt at her feet. She raised an arm and held it straight before her. "Heralds, come forth!" A dozen heralds, dressed in long white tunics, came forward and knelt before the queen. She looked down on them, lowering her arm, her forefinger pointing to the ground. Then she declaimed, "Go forward through all the host and announce my decree. In a fortnight we will begin the nurge." Cries of joy erupted from the assembled crowd. There was much excited nodding of heads and slapping of feet and hands on shoulders. "And I decree that in 7 days' time there shall be a tournament. All warriors who wish to show their prowess may attend. We shall have a contest in each of the 3 manly sports, and whoever proves themselves as the overall best archer, the fastest horseman, the strongest wrestler, shall have the honor of slaying the first game of the great hunt with me." Axia's eyes were fixed on Arsalion as she said this. Their eyes met. She looked at me. Our eyes locked. Her gaze was withering. What can she be thinking? Surely she doesn't expect me to enter the contest, I thought. I slipped away with Theron and Scarus in tow. "I think that went well," I said. "Well enough," said Scarus. "Now our man will hate to perform." The first day of the tournament dawned blue and bright. The morning sun dissipated the evening mists and banished the chill. The first contest was wrestling. 30 warriors came forth to compete, all Massagetae, except for Arsalion, the Sarmatian. A circle about 3 meters in diameter was inscribed in the dust. A raucous band of spectators had assembled around it. A dais was raised to one side, where Axia sat with her 2 brothers. Now these wrestlers were the bad boys of the bunch. Their heads were shaven to avoid being pulled during the match. They were stripped to the waist, their bodies decorated with colorful tattoos of fanciful stepped animals locked in combat. Their skin glistened with oil and sweat. They were muscular and boastful, practicing their holds and throws with each other while awaiting their time in the ring. Drawing on memories from my time and place, they reminded me of sumo wrestlers or maybe a football lineman. I could not but compare them to a bunch of motorcycle gang members or to some of those strange WWF wrestlers I used to watch on TV when I was a kid. 2 by 2 they came forward. At a sign from the referee in the ring, they would circle around each other, feigning and thrusting, taking and breaking holds. They grunted and sweated, throwing each other around like rag dolls. But this was the real thing, not acting. When one of these large bodies was sent flying by a throw, the landing was not gentle on the hard-packed earth. The ground was like concrete. Many times the throwee staggered to his feet only to fall down again, dazed and disoriented. Some never did get up and had to be carried away by 4 or 5 men. A series of broken fingers, dislocated shoulders, sprained ankles and knees and bloody noses kept me busy. Some of the matches were over in a flash with a quick throw or a well-timed hand strike putting out one of the participants. Sometimes the opponents were better matched, and the contest would take over an hour for one of them to yield. The crowd watching took great interest in the matches. There were many aficionados of the finer points of wrestling, and they weren't quiet about voicing their opinions. They shouted encouragement and insults in equal amounts, and laid bets against those in the opposing camps. It was a lively crowd. 2 by 2 the contestants came forward and wrestled, pounded and threw each other around until one of them either yielded or was too incapacitated to continue any further. As the day progressed, 32 wrestlers were pared down between the first round, to 16 in the second round, then to 8, and finally to 4. Arsalion, our boy, did well, easily winning his first 2 rounds. His opponents, though bigger than he was physically, were much slower and less agile. Arsalion was able to swiftly take them down and put them in an arm lock and immobilize them until they yielded. Arsalion's third round was somewhat more difficult. His opponent was quicker and more adept at takedowns than the earlier lot. Arsalion found himself on his back in the dust, his opponents sitting on his chest. But he was able to extricate himself, managed to get a leg over his opponent's shoulder, and in a quick movement exerted a double leg hold on his opponent around the neck, forcing him backwards and completely reversing position with him. The crowd cheered in admiration with this reversal of fortune. I watched as another wrestler worked his way through the rounds like a wrecking ball. This brute, I learned, was called Zobas. He was dangerous and ruthless. He stood at least a head taller than his opponents. His arms were the size of an average man's upper thighs, and his bullet-shaped shaven head was the same width as his neck. His legs were like tree trunks. His hands were twice the size of my own. Muscles bulged on his chest and back, complete with terrifying tattoos. He looked like a cross between a bear, a bull, and a caveman. Zobas had a simple approach to the contest. He wasn't smart, agile, or fast, but was massively strong. He took his time stalking his opponent around the ring. If his opponent ever came within his grasp, he was done for. Zobas would simply pin the opponent's arms against his chest and squeeze until that man passed out. Then he would throw the wretch out of the ring like a rag doll, tossing him so high and so far that it was not possible for him to recover from the crashing impact with the hard ground. And of course, Zobas was Arsalion's opponent in the final round. Now, any normal person, especially me, would have been terrified to face such a brute. But Arsalion was outwardly calm as he stepped into the ring with this towering beast man. He looked to Axia and bowed deeply at the waist, sweeping his right hand in a gesture of greeting. "My Vasilisa," he said, "this is my first test. The gods be with me. I will prevail over this brute. Only give me a token of your favor, a word of encouragement, so that I may smite him." I saw Axia's eyes twinkle and her lips part into half a smile. She looked at Zobas, who was stretching his arms, flexing his muscles, and throwing shadow punches in anticipation of the match. "Zobas," she said, "our most revered champion of the Massagetae host. What say you? This Sarmatian is very sure of himself. Surely you must be quaking in your boots and fear such a pretty-faced opponent. Maybe you should yield now and acknowledge him as your better." Zobas thundered, "Ah! He is pretty-faced, my queen. He is delicate. Let him come within my grasp, and I may rearrange his features to make him look like the rest of us. We shall see what this Sarmatian is made of when he draws breath from the back of his head." There was much cheering and laughter at this exchange. Axia raised her hand to still the crowd. "My Sarmatian prince, it is time that you drink deeply from the cup of humility. We will not think less of you when you fall to this our champion." Axia looked again at Zobias. "Be gentle with the Sarmatian, but teach him a lesson." She raised her hand, and the contest began. Scarus, standing next to me, grabbed my arm and squeezed. "Now we shall see, Dominus. But if that brute does get close to him..." The two opponents circled each other around the ring. Zobas, crouching, arms forward, began to stalk Arsalion, around and around. Arsalion backed away carefully, with grace, fluid steps, as if he were in a ballet. This went on for quite some time. The murmuring of the crowd grew louder and louder. Zobas was getting impatient. "Come here, my little Sarmatian mouse. Let's get this over, or do you wish to dance all day?" he bellowed. These words were barely out of his mouth when Arsalion made his move and sprang forward, aiming a powerful kick high on Zobas's right thigh. The blow hit the mark. Zobas winced, but recovered quickly. "Did you think a little bee sting would stop Zobas?" he snarled. "Come here, little insect, and I will show you what pain is." Again, Arsalion sprang forth and landed another powerful kick, this time on the opposite thigh. Again Zobas winced, but quickly resumed his stalking Arsalion around the ring. But I noticed that his steps were slightly slower, and his breathing was slightly labored. His entire torso and face was glistening now with sweat. "I think, my large friend, that you should talk less and fight more," quipped Arsalion. Zobas reacted angrily, quickening his steps, but Arsalion continued slipping away with the same dance-like agility. But now Arsalion struck again, and then yet again on the sides of Zobas's thighs, with two quick kicks. Now Zobas recoiled in pain. He began to limp, favoring his right leg. Arsalion was now moving faster and began darting and weaving. He struck 2 more times with solid kicks to Zobas's right side. Now Zobas was clearly in pain and getting enraged, but now, because of his bruised upper legs, he had difficulty moving his feet. He began swinging and punching wildly, and stumbled forward, lunging at his opponent. But Arsalion was too fast for him. When Zobas threw a punch, Arsalion darted left to right, eluding the blow, leaving Zobas swinging at empty air. The effort threw him off balance. More kicks aimed at Zobas's flanks now came in quick succession, striking unguarded ribs and upper thighs. Zobas's breathing became more and more labored, and his footsteps grew smaller and smaller. It wasn't long before Zobas was barely moving, merely shuffling his feet. Now Arsalion's blows were concentrated on Zobas's ribs and upper arms. Zobas was approaching the point of exhaustion. He could barely raise his arms and fists. His furtive swings at empty air got weaker and weaker. This left him exposed to more hand strikes and kicks, which were now raining down on him virtually unchecked. Zobas still had not touched Arsalion, who now began to move and circle around his prey. Only Zobas's physical stature kept him on his feet. A less robust man would have fallen long before. Zobas teetered and swayed, but stayed on his feet. The cheering and jeering from the crowd was reaching a crescendo. At first, many of the onlookers were against Arsalion, the outsider, the Sarmatian. But as the match proceeded and Arsalion's strategy began to prevail, the crowd turned into his favor. He was the underdog, the David come to slay the giant. Scarus elbowed me in the ribs to get my attention and whispered in my ear, "Brilliant! Now we come to the final moves." Arsalion was circling around Zobas, whose sheer size was in itself a formidable challenge, even in his now greatly weakened condition. Arsalion stopped his lightning attacks and was looking for an opportunity to win the match. He needed to take down his opponent. By now, Zobas was almost immobile. He tried to turn to face Arsalion as he circled around him, but his movements were painfully slow and labored. Arsalion got around in back of Zobas before he could turn, and in a swift, athletic move, sprang into the air, launching himself sideways and feet first at Zobas's tree stump legs. The heel of his left foot struck the back of Zobas's knee, buckling it under him. The heel of his right foot struck the giant square on the kidney. Zobas, now off balance with the momentum of Arsalion's strike as his knee folded beneath him, came down like a Douglas fir in slow motion, twisting as he fell awkwardly to the ground, ending up on his back. He didn't move. The match was over, to the wild cheering of the crowd. Zobas was out cold. It took 6 warriors to remove him from the ring. Arsalion was raised on the shoulders of the warriors and paraded around the ring and then brought before Axia. "My queen," he said, "the gods have favored me. I have smitten your bullman fairly in this ring. Surely now, she who is worthy of armor will bestow her blessing upon me, champion of the first manly sport, as I go into the second contest." Axia stood on the dais. Again, a fleeting half-smile passed across her lips. "Well done, Sarmatian prince," she said. "But you've only passed the first test. We will see if you prevail against the warriors of our host in archery. As for our blessing, we will withhold our favor, lest it make your head too large for your helmet." Axia looked to me after saying this. There was again that look of recognition, the half-smile, the piercing stare that would have withered mere mortals. That look told me that she was aware of what was going on, that my attempt at matchmaking was known to her, as if she were sending me her thoughts. I know what you're up to, Adam the Wise, and I am not fooled in the least. The next day, the archers were all mounted and ready to go. No shooting static targets at this competition. They were divided into groups of about a dozen archers each. For each group, there was a referee who tallied the score, and a target rider and other horsemen following who gathered the spent targets. The targets consisted of inflated round animal skins with an attached rope. At the call of the referee, the target rider took off at full gallop, whipping around the balls by the attached rope faster and faster. At a second call by the referee, the horse archers sprang off in pursuit, bows raised, with one arrow notched and ready to shoot, and 5 or 6 others held in the drawstring hand. The horses pounded pursuit at full gallop, spurred by their riders, who steered them with their knees. The horses had to be as adept and well-trained as their riders for all of this to work. At random intervals, the target riders let go of the swinging target balls, letting them fly high up into the air. The pursuing horse archers then shot their arrows and quickly, in a flash, transferred a fresh arrow from the bowstring hand onto the drawstring, notched and ready for the next shot. Each rider had a distinctive fletching on his or her arrows, which was their identifying mark for the purpose of keeping score. Now this was an active spectator sport. Those who followed the contest were also mounted, riding with the archers on the flanks, yelling and cheering their favorites on. After 5 or 6 targets thrown like this, the referee would gather them in and tally the score. A succession of targets followed the first round. Smaller balls were thrown randomly in the air by the speeding target riders and were shot at by the pursuing horse archers. Then there were dragged targets, mimicking the run of rabbits and foxes. Again, the pursuing horse archers would loosen as many arrows as they could, reload and fire, seeking to hit the weaving, jumping, and bucking targets. Our man Arsalion was right in the thick of the competition. His intensive training with Arash had honed his archery skills to a fine point. His arrows found their mark on the aerial targets. More than once he was able to get 2 or 3 shots off before the target hit the ground, or before the rabbits and hares had finished their runs. When the final tallies were made, it was between Arsalion and another archer called Pegos. Their scores were tied. The winner would be determined by a showdown. The final part of the contest was now between these 2 horse archers, galloping at full tilt towards each other like 2 jousters. The arrows they shot at each other were blunted with small stuffed leather balls at the head of the arrow in the place of an arrowhead. This made it a lot less dangerous. A hit on the head, however, could knock one of them unconscious. Arsalion and Pegos, bows drawn, faced each other about 30 meters apart. The mounted referees stood in the middle. Each archer was accompanied by another referee whose task was to count the number of arrow strikes on this rider. At a signal from the center referee, the riders spurred their horses forward to a full gallop. Both Pegos and Arsalion held their arrows until they were within a few meters of each other. 3 arrows were then fired by each rider in quick succession. Arsalion was struck twice and Pegos once. The riders thundered past each other, each warrior lying on their horse's back as they passed, using their horse as a shield. Pegos was the first to raise himself up and pivot fully facing the rear as he notched and fired an arrow at his receding opponent. But Arsalion saw this coming and quickly laid his chest flat along the horse's back. Pegos's arrow whistled harmlessly over him. In a flash, Arsalion raised himself, pivoted facing backwards, and fired 3 more arrows in quick succession at the receding Pagos. All of them found their mark. The spectators erupted in a great tumult. Wagers changed hands, and prompted by Theron's men amongst the crowd, a loud chant burst forth, "Arsalion! Arsalion!" This was quickly picked up by much of the crowd and went on for some time. Arsalion, now flushed with his second victory, came over to the Queen's podium. She stood and looked over to me, again with that mischievous half-smile. I wasn't sure if she was angry with me or not. Her eyes sparkled. She turned to Arsalion. Arsalion bowed as he sat on his horse, his arm crossed on his breast as a salute to the Queen. "My Vasilisa, your face shines in my heart like the evening star. I bow to you. You are my inspiration. Twice now the gods have favored me with victory. Give me now a word of encouragement, a blessing, a mere hope that I may ride with you at your side in the great hunt." "Nay, my Sarmatian prince," said Axia. "Skill you have shown in 2 of the manly sports, but there is still a third to come. You have a handsome face, 'tis true, and you come riding pretty horses, dressed in handsome armor. But can you match the speed of our sturdy horses and the Massagetae warriors who ride them? We shall see, my prince. We shall see." Every man, woman, and child of the Massagetae host gathered on the plains outside of the camp the next day for the 3rd and final test. The race was the most popular event of the tournament. The Massagetae, like all the steppe peoples before and since, were highly skilled horse people, born to the saddle. They knew their horses as surely as fishermen know their ships. A large body of competitors of all ages assembled on the course. It was about 2 kilometers long. The rules were simple. The competitors started as a mass in a line at one end of the course. They would race to a stone cairn on the other end, circle it 3 times, and return to the start line. The first to cross the finish line was the winner. The skill was required to navigate through the densely packed body of competitors at the start of the race, separating oneself from this pack at a strategic point in time and getting ahead of it. The race required skill, stamina, and an extraordinary horse that could run like the wind. The day had dawned bright and sunny, but in the distance, to the southeast, a long line of clouds portended trouble. The distant clouds were piled high to anvil-topped thunderheads. The tops of these were brilliant white, reflecting the rising sun. But the horizon was dark, with purple and indigo hues. A deep rumble of distant thunder was felt as much as heard. Theron, Scarus, and I were walking to the place which Arsalion had been given in the starting line. "Not the best day for a race, I think," I said, gesturing to the dark line of clouds. "Do we really want to race during a thunderstorm? Maybe it should be delayed until the storm passes." "Not possible," said Theron. "Once the day has been proclaimed and the lottery drawn to determine starting positions, the Scythians believe it is bad luck to change it. Besides, those riders work every day in the harshest weather on earth. A few raindrops won't deter them." "Bad bit of luck for his starting spot, though," said Scarus. "Would 'a hoped for a spot in them wings, not in the middle." "Right," I said. Well, that's two things we can't control. Another faint rumble punctuated my statement. I looked again to the southeast. That line of thunderclouds has grown since I first saw them. They're definitely headed this way. "Ah, the race will be over before it gets here," said Theron. Arsalion was in good spirits. We found him grooming his shiny black stallion. "A fine morning, my friends," he said. "Are we prepared for victory today? This divine creature here is Isbis, strong and full of fury like a bull, and as swift as the wind. He will be running today without his heavy coat of armor. You will see, none will be able to keep up with us." Another distant rumble of thunder. "I think, my friend, that this race must begin before that yonder storm is upon us," I said. Arsalion looked at the gathering storm and then back to me. "Storm or not, Adam the Wise, come thunder, lightning, and driving rain, and all the powers of the underworld, we will win this race." The riders mounted their horses and proceeded to the start line. There were 80 of them. Then there were their coaches, who would ride with them along the racecourse, shouting instructions and relaying news to their teammate about his or her position in the pack. Then there were scores upon scores of spectators, also mounted on their own horses, flanking the racers, yelling, yelping, and urging their favorites forward. At Axia's signal, the raising of her dragon standard, and a deep-throated blast of a massive horn, the race was on. The approaching storm began to kick up a fierce wind. The pounding of thousands of hooves on the bare ground and dry grasses stirred up a dust cloud of epic proportions. It was difficult to see and follow the course of the race, or to discern who was in the lead. Halfway down the first leg of the race course, the horses were flying at a full gallop, heads pressed forward, manes flying, riders clinging to their traces, extending their bodies almost flat against their horses' necks and backs, their faces touching. The tumult grew louder and louder. A few riders, Arsalion among them, began to separate from the pack. Here and there, some riders clumped together so closely that a misstep from one of their horses, a stumble over a stone, or a depression in the ground would trip some of the horses, propelling their riders cartwheeling into the air. Some of them got up, but many were seriously injured with sprains and broken bones. I had my work cut out for me after the race. The lead racers were reaching the stone cairn and marking the turn. Round 3 times the riders went in headlong and reckless speed. They circled the cairn in very tight turns, jostling, shoving, and whipping their horses at each other. I glanced to the gathering storm. The thunderclouds now towered above us, blotting out almost all light, turning the air a greenish black. A large column of rain gushed from the base of the clouds, making them look like they were attached to the earth. A jagged flash of lightning and a sizzling crack of thunder exploded across the sky, terrifying the horses and throwing them into wild confusion. They scattered it in all directions. The storm had now come upon us amazingly fast. A dozen lead racers had completed their turns around the stone cairn and were racing down the homestretch back to the starting line. I strained to see Arsalion among them, but the blowing dust and the gathering darkness of the storm engulfed them all. They then disappeared into the driving rain. The storm pressed down upon us. We were awash in a flood as the heavens opened up. The rain, accompanied by hail, pelted the animals and humans alike, sending all reeling in different directions. It was so dark that I could hardly see my own horse's head in front of me. Multiple strobe-like lightning flashes punctuated by staccato bursts of thunderclaps terrified my own horse into a panic. She bolted, throwing me to the ground. I got to my feet, unhurt, and looked for the racers. The storm began to pass, barreling along the vast plains unhindered. A shaft of light broke through the gloom like a spotlight, shining down upon the remaining racers thundering towards the finish line. There were only 3 of them left. All others had been scattered by the tempest, and there, miracle of miracles, was Arsalion in the lead, crossing the finish line. The vast crowd had been scattered as well, so only Theron, Scarus, and I were there to greet Arsalion as he finished the race. He sprang from the saddle and walked his stallion to cool it off, leading it by the reins over to our little group of supporters. He smiled broadly and was obviously very proud of himself. Axia and her 2 brothers trotted over. Arsalion knelt before her on one knee. "My Vasilisa, I have come through curtains of water, fire, and ice to claim my place by your side," he said, and bowed his head. I looked at Axia, sitting proud and tall on her steed. Her face was aglow. A coy smile flashed across her lips. She looked at me, and our eyes locked. She nodded to me, and then looked back to Arsalion. She could no longer hide her admiration for him.
You say you're fine, but I can see right through. You're holding your secrets for way too long. This can't keep going on. With every lie, they keep on hurting you, getting away with everything they do. This can't keep going on. No, we're gonna find them, and I'm gonna fight for you. They better start hiding. We'll be running with the lions. We'll be running with the lions. They can't run, they can't hide. We won't stop until they're down. We'll be running with the lions. I'll go through fire, I'll climb the mountains for you. Tell me, 'cause I'm looking out for you. This can't keep going on, no, 'cause you're not alone in this. We'll do this together. No, you're not alone in this. No, we're gonna find them, and I'm gonna fight for you. They better start hiding. We'll be running with the lions. We'll be running with the lions.
Music for Chapter 22. Epidemic Sound, Running with the Lions, by Loving Caliber. Both Shoes Gone Walking, by Morse Harmon. In the Distance, by Teo Mita. The Way of the Warrior, by Yi Nantiro. Not Looking Good, by John Bajork. The Olympic Team, by Philip Ayers. To Valhalla, by John Abbott. Our Final Mission, by Christopher Mo Ditlevson. Last March of the Heroes. The Portal, by Bonnie Grace. Forest Run, by Bonnie Grace. Survival, by Bonnie Grace. Time is Running Fast, by John Bajork. Ed Records, Save the World. Iron Dust, Hidden Eye, Grand Canyon. Ben Sound Evolution. The Archangel Chronicles by Raymond Collotti, copyright 2023, all rights reserved.